They woke to iron, they slept beside blood, and every breath was borrowed from death. In the barracks, dawn meant bruises reopening, not sunlight. Meals were gruel, not comfort. The floor was your bed and silence your shield. This wasn't training, it was survival. Before we settle too deep, feel free to like the video and subscribe if the quiet suits you. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something comforting about knowing we're all tucked into our own corners of the world, sharing the same stillness. There is no natural light in the holding cell. The air is damp, drawn from the earth itself, soaked into the limestone walls and woven into the straw scattered across the stone floor. Beneath it, vermin have made homes. Rats drag bits of mouldy grain into corners. The stink of ammonia and sweat clings to every surface. A shallow bronze basin sits in the far corner, filled not with water, but waste. No drain, no soap, only the faint hope that no one else will use it before it's emptied. The hour is pre-dawn, though you would not know it from within. In the ludus, the Gladiator training school, day and night bleed into one another like bruises. A torch sputters beyond the barred window above the corridor. It casts no warmth. Its only function is to define the passage of time through flicker and fade. You are awake because sleep is unreliable here, not because of noise or fear, but because the body, conditioned under brutality, becomes its own alarm. Your name has long since been erased. Now you are referred to only by origin and rank. Numidian, third rank. Others carry similar tags. Thracian, Samnite, Retiarius. Not just ethnicities or places, but styles of combat assigned based on size, build, and status. Your real name exists only in the memory of the man you were before the gate closed behind you. That name is not spoken here. It holds no currency. Citizenship has been stripped. You are not Roman. You are gladiatorous, a body with muscle, cost, and expiration. The cell measures no more than 6 feet in any direction. Above you, heavy stone arches carry the ceiling weight, reinforced with iron struts. The walls have grooves from years of captives clawing at them. Some names are carved shallow and desperate. Others are scratched with precision. Dates, symbols, prayers in Greek, Phoenician, even Punic. The oldest mark is dated 83 BC, a time when Spartacus still trained Benna. At these ceilings, the newest etching is yesterday's. The word Libera carved into the wall beside a crusted bloodstain. The irony is lost on no one. Some die before they ever reach the arena. They fall ill in training or collapse from infection. Infirmity is not tolerated. It is dragged out into the courtyard and left beneath the sun until motion ceases. Others are culled by the lanista, the master of the ludus, if their performance dips below economic value. The economics of gladiatorial combat are precise. A body that cannot entertain cannot earn. A body that cannot earn is a cost. Costs are eliminated without ceremony. The iron gate at the end of the corridor is opened only once a day, just after the first bell of morning. When it moves, it does not swing, it groans. Its hinges have not been oiled in years. That sound is the day's signal. The body must rise. The body must prepare. Your cell has no window to the forum, no view of the empire you serve by suffering. Only the echoing rhythm of boots beyond the bars assures you that Rome still stands above. The Lanista's men begin their rounds. They do not speak. They carry brands and rods, symbols of their authority, not weapons. No one resists. To resist would mean disfigurement, and a disfigured gladiator is worthless. Discipline is maintained through deprivation, not torture. The body learns to comply not through pain, but through the promise of pain. You are not the only one in the corridor. There are 12 cells here. Each one holds a man, or, in rare cases, a woman, trained for blood spectacle. The women are kept farther down, away from the general population. Their matches are rare, more novelty than competition. Their treatment is not gentler, sometimes it is worse. In private, guards discuss them in lowered voices, not out of shame but economy. What is whispered about is often more profitable than what is seen. Across from your cell, a Gaul scratches the rim of his basin with a sharpened bone. He has been here 6 years. No one expected him to last more than 6 months. His survival is not seen as an achievement, but as a financial anomaly. He costs more to feed than he earns, yet his fights still draw crowds, not for his skill, but for the statistical curiosity he represents. Odds are posted in the taverns. Will he fall today? The ground outside the cell is swept each morning with a straw broom soaked in vinegar water, not for sanitation. Disease is endemic here, but to keep the dust down. The stench of old blood, rot and sweat is made worse by dryness. Vinegar does not clean, it masks. The same mix is used to disinfect wounds, flush mouths, and clean the wooden swords used in training. The floor beneath you is worn smooth in one spot, the place where most men sleep. There is no bedding, only straw. The lice burrow deep. You itch constantly. Your skin is a network of small red welts and scabs. Infection is a constant risk, but rarely treated. If it worsens, it is lanced with a heated knife. The pain is secondary. The infection must not show on match day. Your first breath of morning comes with the groan of the gate. Iron on iron, then footsteps, then names, not spoken, but called in chalk on the wall. A mark means training. A double mark means match day. Today your name is marked once, not a death sentence, not yet. But the routine begins. You are ordered into the hall. The corridor reeks of oil and mildew. Your legs ache from disuse. Joints crack as you stretch upright. Every muscle fibre screams in silence. No one speaks. There is no camaraderie here. Bonds are dangerous. Friendships mean grief, and grief means weakness. The trainers do not permit it. The doctoras, former gladiators turned instructors, wait in the training yard. Their bodies are scarred mosaics of old wounds. They carry rudis, wooden practice swords, more dangerous than they appear. They are not used to simulate combat. They are used to enforce obedience. This is only the beginning. The training yard is already filled with heat, though the sun has barely risen above the eastern arches of the ludus. Dust clings to everything, to skin, to breath, to open wounds. The surface of the arena minor, a sand-covered oval set deep within the walled grounds, is raked before dawn, but the stains cannot be swept away. Dark patches mark places where blades once pierced flesh. They are not washed. They are left visible as warning. The men form into pairs beneath the supervision of the doctores armorum, former fighters whose time in the arena earned them privileges rather than freedom. Their scars are not reminders of glory, but records of survival. They carry rudis, short wooden swords once symbolic of manumission. Here, the rudis is not symbolic. It is corrective. It bruises shoulders, thighs, jaws, any place where movement lags or instinct fails. Training begins before food. Muscles are not warmed through stretching, but through violence. The first strike comes before the first command. Wooden blades hammer against wooden shields. Splinters fly. Men stagger. The sounds of grunts and gasps echo across the walls, bouncing against the frescoed columns that depict mythic battles with sanitized brutality. Hercules with his lion, Achilles with his spear. They are painted without blood. You are assigned to the Hoplomachus group today. The term suggests heavily armed, but nothing here is ceremonial. You are fitted with a greave on one leg, a small round shield, and a long wooden spear dulled at the tip, but still capable of shattering ribs. The stance required is unnatural. Feet wide, shoulder lowered, head tilted. The spear must be held firm with the dominant hand while maintaining a rotating shield defense with the other. It is not a warrior's pose. It is a puzzle of strain, designed to punish imbalance. The first hour is devoted to forms. Each move is repeated dozens of times. Thrust, parry, step, rotate. The ground is marked with grooves where hundreds of men have moved identically. The instructors demand silence. If a man groans, he is struck. If he falters, he is sent to run laps around the perimeter under the weight of his gear until his legs collapse. There is no encouragement, no instruction beyond demonstration. The expectation is that you learn by mimicry, not by explanation. In the second hour, the paired drills begin. These are not matches, they are controlled brutality. One man attacks while the other defends, then roles switch. There are no feints, no flourishes, just repetition under duress. Bones are bruised, wrists swell, ankles twist. Blood mixes with dust and sweat and soaks into the sand. There are no bandages. Injuries are noted, not treated. Medical care is reserved for wounds that threaten productivity. The body is not protected, it is tested. No water is given until the drills end. Dehydration is a condition, not a concern. Trainers observe pallor, breath rate, foot placement. They evaluate men the way farmers assess livestock. Value is in form, not comfort. Several men vomit from exertion and heat. One collapses. He is dragged to the edge of the yard, where he is left face down in the shade. Whether he returns tomorrow depends not on recovery, but on whether a replacement can be found. When the horn sounds at last, the men retreat to the refectorium, a shaded eating court lined with low benches. The food is waiting. It does not change. A portion of boiled barley, dense and sticky, served in a terracotta bowl. One strip of flatbread, hard-edged and stale. A small cup of watered-down vinegar wine, more antiseptic than refreshment. This is not a meal. It is a ration, designed to maintain weight without promoting strength. The gladiator's diet, gladiatorum sagina, is structured to emphasize size. A heavier fighter bleeds more. The crowd likes blood. There is no cutlery. The barley is scooped by hand. No conversation is permitted. Only the sounds of chewing, swallowing, breathing. The men eat with the urgency of habit, not hunger. Some have broken teeth. Others have ulcers or bleeding gums from grain husks or earlier blows. There is no dental care. Pain is constant and expected. When food cannot be chewed, it is swallowed whole. If a man cannot eat, he is sent to the infirmary for porridge or dismissal, sometimes both. The benches are stained with grease and grime. They are not cleaned between shifts. The bowls are rinsed once a day in a communal trough. Each bears the mark of the lanista, etched into the clay, proof that even the vessels of sustenance are owned. Those who linger over their food are punished. Eating time is timed. The body is a schedule. It must be trained, fed, and stored efficiently. Above the refectorium, inscriptions in Latin are carved into the stone. Phrases once believed to offer strength or protection. Fortis fortuna adjuvat. Fortune favours the brave. Vivere militara est. To live is to fight. They serve now as grim irony. Fortune favours profit. Bravery is irrelevant. Obedience is survival. After the meal, the men are ordered to wash. There is no privacy. A communal cistern, fed by a lead pipe, pours cold water into a shallow basin. Each man is allotted 30 seconds under the stream. Soap is rare and reserved for favoured fighters. Most use sand to scrub sweat from their skin. It does not clean. It abrades. Wounds are opened. Scabs are stripped. Infection lingers beneath fingernails and in the creases of the groin and underarms. The smell of iron and mildew never leaves. Any man who bleeds openly is marked with ash on the shoulder. This signals the valetudinarium, the on-site infirmary, that treatment may be required. But the mark is not a guarantee of aid. The Medici, often enslaved Greeks, with basic training, prioritize fighters with value. A deep cut on a prime prospect earns a poultice and bandage. The same cut on a poor performer may receive vinegar and cloth, if anything. The bathing area is surrounded by stone columns. Graffiti marks every surface. Names, dates, crude sketches of female figures. Oaths to gods long forgotten. Some inscriptions are written backward. These are not coded messages. They are signs of head trauma. Repeated blows to the skull cause confusion, memory loss, hallucinations. Some men become untrainable not from wounds, but from disorientation. They are not released. They are assigned to janitorial tasks or used in demonstration matches where death is guaranteed. Once washed, the men are returned to their cells. Midday sun scorches the tiled roof. The heat builds inside the stone walls. There is no airflow. The door is closed, not locked but barred from outside. Inside, the body rests. No bedding is provided, only the straw that remains from the previous night. Flies gather around open sores. Lice nest in the folds of the loincloth. Breathing becomes shallow. Sleep is brief and uneasy. The origins of a gladiator begin far from the Colosseum. They begin in the margins, in the ashes of conquered cities, in prison cells, in slave markets, and in debt ledgers too large to ever be repaid. The arena is only the final act in a life that has already been seized. The beginning is quieter, more bureaucratic, more routine. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Rome's borders stretched from Britannia to Syria. Its victories were measured not just in territory, but in flesh. Each conquest brought a surge of captives, their bodies inventoried and categorized like grain or cattle. From Judea came zealots in chains. From Dacia, miners and builders. From Germania, men marked by height and strength, ideal for the amphitheatre. Prisoners of war were the first to be selected. Their value lay not in their guilt, but in their ability to die well. The term noxii designated those sentenced to execution by beast or blade. Others, labelled damnati ad ludum, were given a different fate, enrollment in a gladiator school. There they would serve a term of training and combat, not as a punishment, but as a commodity. The ludus was not a place of redemption. It was a labour facility in which the body was reconditioned, shaped not into a soldier, but into a spectacle. Those who arrived bore little resemblance to the mythologized warriors painted on modern frescoes. They came sick, wounded, underfed. Some had shackles removed only after branding. Others carried the ink of tribal tattoos or foreign gods, marks that would be burned away or covered with scars. A second class of gladiators emerged from within the empire, condemnati, men convicted of crimes both real and imagined. Theft, desertion, and sedition were common charges, but so too were crimes of debt or religious defiance. The judicial system was flexible. Courts could commute a death sentence to a term in the arena, not from me. A Thracian, for instance, fought with a small curved blade and a rectangular shield. His armour included greaves and an ornate helmet with a crest shaped like a griffin. A Murmillo wielded a gladius and carried a heavy shield, his helmet styled with a fish-shaped crest. These distinctions were not cultural honours. They were visual archetypes, designed for contrast, drama, and branding. The body was not trained to win, but to endure. New recruits were first taught how to fall, backward, sideways, rolled. Padded earth softened the impact, but could not prevent bruises. Joints were twisted, ankles snapped. The doctores insisted this was necessary. An injured gladiator who could stand and gesture to the crowd, even in pain, was more valuable than a skilled one who died too quickly. Every technique was rehearsed until it became unconscious. Shield parries, forward thrusts, overhand blows. Mornings were spent in drills, afternoons in conditioning. Men ran in full armour under the sun. Others lifted heavy stones repeatedly until their limbs failed. Evening hours were devoted to sparring, under supervision, but without mercy. Wooden weapons caused fractures. A misstep could dislocate a knee or shatter a collarbone. Those injuries were documented, assessed, and often ignored. Despite the brutality, records were meticulously kept. Wax tablets and papyrus scrolls preserved names, origins, match records, and financial valuations. These documents were not for posterity. They were ledgers. The gladiator was an asset, one that could appreciate or depreciate based on performance, appearance, and crowd reaction. Occasionally, inscriptions were carved by the fighters themselves, scratched into the plaster of training hall walls or into the underside of bunk frames. Phrases like non timeo mortem, I do not fear death, or hoc est vitae pretium, this is the price of life. Others simply marked the number of days survived, a tally of time spent inside a machine that had no intention of returning them to the world. Ethnic identity was stripped away and recoded into performance. Nubians were assigned to the net and trident style of the retiarius. Gauls often became secutores, pursuers. Easterners from Syria or Cappadocia were favoured for the more elaborate costumed matches, often staged as reenactments of mythological scenes. Few refused. Refusal brought beating, starvation, or forced isolation in lightless cells. Women were not absent. By the Flavian era, female gladiators, gladiatresses, were displayed in smaller venues, often before private audiences. They were not trained in the same style, nor given the same status. Their appearances were marketed as exotic, erotic, or comedic. Surviving frescoes show them bare-armed with minimal armour. Their matches were advertised not for their violence, but for their novelty. None are recorded to have earned freedom. The average term inside the ludus was short. 1 to 5 years was the range for most. Few survived long enough to complete a contract. Those who did were occasionally awarded the rudis, a wooden sword symbolic of retirement and manumission. But even freedom was precarious. Former fighters were stigmatized. Many returned to the school, not as students or trainers, but as performers in mock battles or ceremonial executions. The psychological toll of ludus life is hinted at only in fragments, graffiti etched into stairwells, marginalia in slave registers, bruised temple bones found in burial trenches outside Rome's eastern gate. The human mind, isolated in labour and stripped of identity, reshapes itself to fit its surroundings. Some forgot their birth names, others forgot their languages entirely. One burial fragment lists a man only as Pugnax, the combative one. His skull bore 3 healed fractures and 1 unhealed one. He died at 27. By the time a gladiator enters the arena, he is already transformed, not into a warrior, but into a creature tailored for a singular function. Movement is rehearsed, pain is normalized, death is expected. The crowd sees strength. But the body that enters the Colosseum is not beginning a fight, it is completing a process. It began far earlier, on parchment, in chains, in silence. For the gladiator, the arena presented a threat not just of death, but of disfigurement. A clean kill was rare. More common were injuries that maimed without ending life. Limbs severed at the joint, eyes pierced, jaws shattered. If the fighter survived, he was returned to the valetudinarium, where rudimentary surgeries were performed without anesthesia and without guarantees. Amputations were carried out with bronze saws. Wounds were cauterized with hot iron. Infection was assumed. Survival accidental. Between games, the arena was raked, the sand replaced, the blood scrubbed from armour and blades with vinegar and wool, but the odour lingered. Blood, even dried, emits a sweetness edged with iron. Add to that the stench of sweat, feces, and the fear emitted through glands and breath. The Colosseum was a hive of human decay masked by incense and distance. The higher one sat, the less one smelled. For the lowest ranks, the air was saturated with rot. Some gladiators became celebrities. Their names were carved into walls, painted on pottery, etched into oil lamps and dice. Graffiti in Pompeii lists the victories of Celidus the Thracian, called the delight of the girls. Another praises Crescens, the net fighter, beloved of the women. These were not widespread adulations, but urban cults of personality, generated by repetition and scarcity. Few gladiators survived long enough to earn names remembered outside their precincts. Combatants who showed skill and charisma might receive gifts from patrons, money, clothing, even temporary lodging outside the ludus between games, but such favors were conditional. The affection of the crowd was fickle. A single poor performance could turn adoration into ridicule. A stumble in the sand was not just a misstep, it was a public declaration of fallibility. The games extended beyond men. Animals fought each other or were set against criminals and prisoners of war. Executions were staged in theatrical formats, myth reenactments where condemned men played characters destined to die. A man portraying Icarus was launched from a platform with wax wings and fell to his death on the arena floor. Others played Orpheus, Prometheus, or Actaeon, with endings scripted to match the myths, with real beasts and real blood. Those who perished were not buried with rites. Most were discarded into mass graves outside the city walls or sold for medical dissection. The Colosseum produced more than entertainment. It produced corpses, wounds, legend, and silence. The silence belonged to the gladiators who returned to the tunnels beneath the arena after their matches. They were not permitted to linger. Whether victorious or spared, they descended into the hypogeum to be stripped, examined, treated, or restrained. Some bled out in the corridor before reaching the infirmary. Others collapsed from exhaustion, unable to speak, twitching from concussion or blood loss. They were not mourned. There were no eulogies. Their names were etched on wax tablets if they had performed adequately. If not, they were omitted. Even in death, performance determined memory. The Colosseum stands at the centre of the empire's capital, not merely as a monument, but as an instrument. Constructed under the Flavian dynasty and completed in 80 CE, its official name was the Amphitheatrum Flavium, a title reserved for imperial propaganda. But the people of Rome never called it that. They referred to it only in proximity, to the colossal statue of Nero that once loomed nearby. The Colosseum, a structure as vast in reputation as in stone. Built from travertine, tuff, and Roman concrete, it could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, arranged in a strict hierarchy that reflected the Roman social order. Senators sat nearest the arena floor, their marble benches inscribed with personal names and political titles. Above them sat equestrians, then plebeians. Women and the poor were relegated to the highest tiers, where the air was thinner and the spectacle more distant. Even among the masses, hierarchy was never suspended. The structure is elliptical, 187 metres long and 155 metres wide, with 4 levels of arcades, each supported by engaged columns of differing orders. Doric on the ground floor, Ionic above, and Corinthian on the third. Its outer facade remains a skeletal echo of its former grandeur, but its purpose survives in records, ruins, and bone. The games were staged not to entertain, but to reinforce. The crowd did not come to be distracted. It came to be reminded of the power of the emperor, of the subjugation of enemies, of the consequences of dissent. The Colosseum was Rome's most effective narrative device, where citizenship and loyalty were rewarded with the illusion of dominance over life and death. Gladiators entered not as challengers, but as tools. They were announced like livestock, paraded before the crowd, made to walk the perimeter of the arena floor, while trumpets blared, and the editor, the magistrate or emperor sponsoring the EVs, waved to the assembled thousands. There was no introduction of background, no mention of name unless fame had elevated it to commercial utility. The body was the message. Its scars were its credentials. Before the games began, ritual was required. The pompa, or opening procession, included musicians, torchbearers, and priests. Sacred rites were performed to appease the gods, often before a statio, a temporary altar erected at the eastern gate. Incense was burned, livestock was sacrificed. Blood, even before the first combatant fell, was considered essential. Contrary to later romantic depictions, not every match was to the death. The majority of early contests were highly regulated and supervised. Gladiators were expensive investments, trained and housed at significant cost. To discard them casually was bad economics. Instead, matches were scored by form, control, and crowd response. A good fight was not a brief one. It was a performance that simulated risk while avoiding unnecessary loss of asset. But when death occurred, and it did, it was neither solemn nor private. The crowd responded with a roar, sometimes standing, sometimes chanting. Bloodlust was not a passive experience. It was participatory. Wooden tokens were thrown from the stands, redeemable for food or coin, rewarding those who anticipated the outcome. The body, once collapsed, was dragged by hook from the sand and dumped into a small lift shaft known as the spoliarium, where attendants stripped it of armor and valuables before disposal. The arena floor itself concealed complex machinery. Beneath the wooden planks lay the hypogeum, a network of tunnels, cages, and elevators that allowed animals and scenery to be raised through trapdoors. Lions, bears, crocodiles, and leopards appeared as if conjured, often half-starved, to ensure aggression. Imported from Africa and Asia Minor, these beasts were not mere opponents. They were imperial trophies, forced into ritual combat as symbols of Roman mastery over nature and the known world. Fame in the Roman Empire was not a safeguard, it was a transaction, and for the gladiator it came with a sharpened edge. The crowd's adoration, fleeting and conditional, could elevate a man's status to temporary divinity, but never to safety. Not in Rome, not inside the economy of blood. The state did not issue protection to popular fighters. Their names might be sung in bathhouses, etched into tavern walls, or sold as terracotta figurines, but no amount of acclaim could sever the contract that bound them to the lanista. Ownership remained absolute. The gladiator, whether loved or feared, remained an asset, and all assets could be spent. Public favour did confer some privileges. A widely recognised gladiator might be excused from the most humiliating performances, mock executions, theatrical deaths, or matches against condemned criminals. Some were given lighter training loads between scheduled games. Others received better rations or softer bedding. These were incentives, not rewards, and all could be revoked without explanation. The arena measured fame by volume, of applause, of wagers, of written chants carved into seating rows. But the state measured worth in coin. If a gladiator failed to draw crowds, he was devalued, regardless of skill or survivability. Victories did not secure his standing, only revenue did. The libelli, programs printed and circulated on the days of games, listed fighters by name, origin, rank, and record. These scrolls became currency for the crowd, who memorized statistics and argued over matchups in advance. The most favored names received chance upon entrance, but a favored name could also draw political envy. Behind the arena, imperial and senatorial factions watched with their own calculations. A gladiator admired too loudly, especially by the plebs, became a symbol, and symbols were dangerous in Rome. They could galvanize unrest. A celeb, rated fighter, especially one from a foreign province or of striking physical presence, might find himself invited to private gatherings, banquets hosted by elites who sought novelty and proximity to violence. There, stripped of armor and reputation, he became a curiosity, a creature summoned to amuse, to demonstrate balance, to be questioned. His responses were not recorded, but his movements were studied. A misstep, an unwise comment, or simply an expression of discontent could be enough to end his career, not through demotion, but by reassignment to a fatal pairing. The Lannistae, ever cautious of political missteps, monitored their stock. A gladiator who drew too much notice from the wrong figures might be sold quietly to a different school far from Rome. Others were scheduled for matches in remote cities where their deaths would pass unnoticed in the urban register. Political retaliation within the ranks was also common. Gladiators operated under a hierarchy maintained not only by trainers but by unspoken alliances. Veteran fighters with strong records held sway over newer recruits. Disputes over status, training schedules, or shared women, whether servants or prisoners, were resolved through sanctioned sparring or informal punishment. These conflicts were monitored by the doctores, who intervened only when the damage risked reducing overall value. The politics of the ludus were layered. Trainers favoured certain fighters, often for personal gain. A well-connected lanista could manipulate match pairings, delay a bout, or even ensure a favourable opponent if bribes were received or favours promised. Betting circles operated beneath the surface, fed by information leaked from within the schools. A false rumour about an injury could shift odds dramatically. Trainers sometimes encouraged these rumours to drive wagers or reduce pressure on an overtaxed fighter. Those who refused to cooperate found themselves subjected to what records euphemistically call disciplinary matches. These were contests against overwhelming odds, 2 against 1, or with deliberately mismatched equipment. The crowd, unaware of the internal tensions, interpreted the bloodshed as drama. The truth was known only behind the walls. Fame also complicated relationships with Roman women. While marriage was forbidden, liaisons were frequent. Upper-class women were known to bribe guards to gain access to fighters, driven by a mix of attraction, defiance, and the allure of the forbidden. Some gladiators received gifts, coins, perfumes, amulets. Others were marked with names carved into their armour by patrons. These affections were unstable. The same woman who sent wine and silks might later demand a match be scheduled simply to prove possession. Gladiators in this arrangement were not lovers. They were property passed between hands, both coarse and perfumed. Graffiti in Pompeii records the desperation such fame could bring. One wall bears the inscription Suspirium puellarum Celadus Thraex. Celadus, the Thracian, is the girl's heartthrob. Another shows a carved sketch of a helmeted man alongside the words Petitum est. He was sought after. But no graffiti records the aftermath, what came when the crowd forgot or when the victor grew too visible in the eyes of the wrong man. Imperial involvement added another layer of peril. Emperors attended games not only as spectators but as editors. They could override decisions, spare lives, or condemn victors at whim. Commodus, who fancied himself a gladiator, staged matches in which he alone was armed. His opponents were often maimed veterans or bound prisoners, dragged before the emperor to die theatrically. Those who protested were beheaded. Those who watched learned. Gladiators who pleased the emperor might receive golden palm branches or ceremonial rudis swords crafted of ivory. These were not weapons, but symbols of approval. Yet imperial favour was dangerous. Commodus once ordered a celebrated fighter thrown from the stands after he failed to bow quickly enough. Caligula had a gladiator executed mid-match for glancing at the wrong woman in the emperor's retinue. To be noticed was to be exposed. The liberty-freed gladiators did not escape this system. Even those granted the rudis and their manumission papers remained marked by their past. Few were accepted into Roman society. Some became trainers, others enforcers or private bodyguards. A handful opened taverns in the Subura district, catering to soldiers, prostitutes, and gamblers. But many returned to the arena, not to fight, but to die, brought back as part of staged executions or anniversary games honouring old victories. The state did not permit symbols to retire quietly. The psychological toll of this visibility was recorded obliquely. Inscriptions on lead-cursed tablets, recovered from wells and grave sites, reveal the rage of those betrayed by fame. Let the limbs of the Murmillo, who scorned me, rot in the sand. Let his eyes burst like grapes. Let his throat choke with his own blood. The tone is personal, obsessive. These were not political grievances. They were emotional collisions made inevitable by the intersection of violence and celebrity. A gladiator's body was therefore not his own. but neither was his name, his image, or his trajectory. Every muscle he built, every scar he bore, every moment he stood in the sand became material for others, audiences, editors, rivals, and elites to manipulate. The pain he endured was not private, it was broadcast, scored, taxed, and when it ceased to serve, it was erased. The female body in Rome was not excluded from violence. It was woven into it, ritually, recreationally, legislatively. In the realm of gladiatorial combat, women appeared less frequently, but not less significantly. Their presence, though marginalized by historians and mythologized by later art, was a public reality, one the empire did not always record but routinely consumed. The gladiatrix, a female gladiator, existed at the edge of institutional legitimacy. Her origin, like her male counterpart, lay in captivity, debt, or desperation. Some were enslaved women deemed physically viable for exhibition. Others were infames, a legal category that included prostitutes, actresses, and performers, women who had, by Roman law, already forfeited their civic dignity. In rare cases, freed women volunteered. But unlike male auctorati, their contracts were often informal, their status temporary, and their appearances tightly controlled by the editor's discretion. No central ludus was known to specialize in the training of female combatants. Instead, they were inserted into existing programs, housed separately from the men, and trained in adapted forms. Evidence suggests these women were not afforded the same equipment, dietary support, or medical care. Their matches were considered novelties, rarely recorded in formal ledgers unless attached to scandal, imperial curiosity, or public controversy. The venues where gladiatrices fought were smaller, amphitheatres in provincial cities, temporary wooden arenas erected during festival games, or private courtyards at elite banquets. The events were advertised sparingly. Surviving inscriptions refer to mulieres pugnavarunt, women fought, as footnotes, not headlines. Their presence was tolerated, even encouraged, but always framed as spectacle rather than sport. Rome's social order, structured by pudicitia, modesty, and auctoritas, or thori, made the sight of armed women deliberately transgressive. Their appearances mocked traditional femininity while exploiting it. Costumes were minimized, armor was stylized. Some fought bare-chested not by choice, but by command. This was not to ensure mobility or fairness. It was to emphasize vulnerability, to transform combat into theater. Graffiti from Pompeii and Ostia depict crude sketches of female fighters. One shows a woman with a short sword and rounded shield, labelled Amazona. Another matches her against Achillea in a parody of myth. These pairings were often scripted to reference legendary duels, with the women assigned symbolic names and poses. The outcome mattered less than the visual. The audience was not seeking martial excellence, they were seeking inversion. The physical toll was no less severe. The women bled, they fractured bones, they suffered concussions, lacerations, disfigurement. But unlike their male counterparts, they rarely received surgical care or post-fight rest. Many were discarded after a single performance. Others, if found entertaining, were scheduled again and again, their bodies used until unprofitable. Archaeological evidence of gladiatrices is sparse but definitive. In 1996, a cremation site was discovered outside Southwark in London, dating to the 2nd century CE. Among the funerary goods, oil lamps engraved with scenes of female combatants, weapons scaled to smaller hands, and ointment jars for healing balm. The body, though cremated, had been buried with care, an indication that the woman had attained notoriety, or at least value, in death. Elsewhere, a marble relief from Halicarnassus depicts two female fighters labelled Amazon and Achillea, both helmeted, both armed, both undefeated according to the inscription. The record claims they were granted freedom after the match. Whether this was symbolic or actual is unclear. Most likely the gesture was theatrical, freedom granted in inscription but not in law. The legal standing of female gladiators remained ambiguous. In 19 CE, Emperor Tiberius issued a senatorial decree forbidding women of senatorial or equestrian families from appearing in the arena. This edict, recorded in the Lex Julia Theatralis, did not ban female combatants outright. It restricted the class from which they could be drawn. In effect, it pushed the practice further into the lower ranks of Roman society, where the boundaries between punishment, performance, and profit were more easily blurred. The motivations for entering combat were rarely voluntary. Enslaved women were selected, not recruited. Those sentenced to the arena for crimes or debts were given no choice. For others, particularly foreign captives, combat offered one of the few routes to visibility, even if that visibility came at the cost of dignity. A successful match might earn coin, a gift, or the rare opportunity to move between cities. But mobility was not freedom, it was displacement. Socially, the gladiatrix occupied a liminal zone, both reviled and desired. Elite Roman women sometimes attended female matches in secret, shielded by veils or obscured by servants. Their presence was not to support, but to observe. The gladiatrix represented what Roman women were forbidden to be: unbound, armed, public. She was not a role model, she was a boundary marker. Inside the ludus, these women were isolated. They did not train alongside male fighters. Some instructors refused to teach them. Others treated them as burdens, additional mouths to feed, bodies to monitor, reputations to protect. Sexual abuse was common and often institutionalized. There are no surviving records of complaints filed, punishments issued, or protections established. The absence of evidence is not the absence of harm, it is the erasure of resistance. Lactating women were sometimes made to fight shortly after childbirth, either to punish them or to draw a larger crowd. The brutality was marketed as fertility myth. Death in the arena was not considered infanticide. The child belonged to no lineage that Rome recognized. If the mother survived, she returned to her cell. If she did not, the infant was removed and sold, or left behind the training yard. Unlike male gladiators, few women earned the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing retirement and release. Their contracts, when they existed at all, were informal. Their deaths were rarely recorded in municipal registers. A female fighter who vanished from the schedule was assumed dead, injured, or relocated. No ceremonies marked their passing. No monuments bore their names. The silence surrounding gladiatrices is not accidental. It is curated. Roman historians, Tacitus, Livy, Suetonius, mention them in passing, if at all. Their appearances were classified among curiosities, not chronicles. The imperial record had no interest in legitimizing their participation. To do so would acknowledge not just that women fought, but that they bled, endured, and occasionally won. The valetudinarium does not resemble a modern hospital. It is not a place of rest. It is a machine for repair, efficient, narrow in scope, and governed by a calculus that places cost above care. Located within or adjacent to the ludus, its purpose is logistical, not humanitarian. The injured are evaluated in terms of recovery time, utility, and public expectation. The wounded are not treated because they suffer. They are treated because they are expensive. The architecture is functional. Rectangular in plan, the building includes a covered portico, a receiving chamber, and a handful of treatment rooms separated by thin plaster walls. The air inside is stagnant. Olive oil lamps burn continuously. not for light but to mask the odor. Blood, sweat, feces, and burnt tissue mingle with the vinegar used to cleanse wounds. The floors are compacted clay, stained black near the treatment benches. Crude wooden pallets, stacked with straw and soaked in bodily fluids, line the walls. There is no anesthesia. Pain is not mitigated. It is observed. Gladiators are restrained with straps of oxhide when wounds must be cauterized. The smell of seared flesh hangs in the rafters. Cauterization is the standard treatment for open wounds. Bronze instruments, heated until they glow, applied directly to tissue. The resulting burns are severe, often more dangerous than the original laceration. But cautery stops bleeding, and stopping blood loss is the first priority. Function precedes comfort. Doctors in the valetudinarium are not citizens. Many are enslaved Greeks trained in rudimentary medicine. Their knowledge is practical and brutal, acquired not from texts but repetition. They are neither healers nor philosophers. They are technicians of survival. Their tools include hooked scalpels, bone saws, crude forceps, and sharpened reeds used to drain abscesses. These instruments are reused until rust, dead, or broken. Sterilization is limited to wiping with vinegar or heating over flame. Cross-contamination is common, so is death. Bones are reset without splints. Dislocations are corrected by force. In cases of compound fracture, the limb is amputated with a single pull and saw. No prosthetics are offered. A one-armed gladiator is not rehabilitated. He is removed. Crippled bodies are sometimes transferred to municipal workshops for menial labor, pulling carts, crushing grain, or fueling public bath furnaces. Others are sold to taverns or brothels, where disfigurement becomes novelty. The valetudinarium has no morgue. The dead are dragged through the rear threshold at night, wrapped in their own bloodied tunics, and deposited in communal pits, or carted to necropolis outside the city walls. There are no burial rites, no markings. The state does not inter gladiators with honour, unless they belonged to imperial schools and achieved widespread fame. In most cases, death is a statistical adjustment. Infections are pervasive. Tetanus, known only as spasmus mandibulae, stiffens the jaw and paralyzes the lungs. Gangrene turns limbs black in hours. Sepsis brings fever, confusion, vomiting. Few recover. Leeches are sometimes applied, not as therapy, but as ritual. The beliefs that govern such procedures are pre-Galenic, inconsistent across schools, and often grounded in superstition rather than evidence. Herbs are administered in paste form, wrapped in linen, and stuffed into wounds. If the patient survives, the treatment is validated. If not, it is forgotten. The hospital records are incomplete. Surviving fragments of wax tablets from Capua, Pompeii, and Ephesus show lists of patients matched with date of injury, site of trauma, and outcome. The entries are clinical. Mamillo, left thigh, lateral cut, return to training, 7 days. Thracian, abdominal tear, expired, 3 days. Nam is rarely given. The body is the subject, not the person. For those recovering, the regime is strict. Food is limited to broth and barley water. Movement is restricted. Physical therapy is non-existent. The goal is re-entry into training within a fortnight. Any longer is a risk to investment. Those who show slow progress are sometimes beaten to stimulate circulation. Others are assigned to clean latrines or serve food to uninjured fighters as proof of functionality. Compliance is expected. Complaint is not recorded. Psychological trauma is not named. Fighters who refuse to speak, tremble during drills, or flinch at sudden sound are deemed defective. Some are isolated in dark cells. Others are drugged with opium resin or belladonna, alkaloids that sedate but do not heal. Hallucinations are common, so is suicide. No safeguards are in place to prevent self-harm. Those who die by their own hands are categorized as withdrawn in the hospital record and excised from the public registry. Despite this, Roman medicine advanced through the gladiators' suffering. The ars medica, developed by physicians like Galen, who began his career treating wounded fighters in Pergamon, was honed on their broken bones and torn muscle. Galen's anatomical insights were gathered from the arena, where death made dissection permissible. His surgical notes reference the thickness of the thoracic wall, the elasticity of tendons, the healing rate of superficial cuts versus puncture wounds. These were not theoretical observations. They were compiled from daily labor inside blood-stained walls. The gladiator's body became a textbook, a canvas of pain onto which early Roman medicine etched its knowledge. Medical experimentation was not regulated. Opium dosage, arterial ligatures, and poultice compositions were adjusted in real time, measured only by the patient's survival. Consent was irrelevant. There was no ethical framework, only efficacy, no religious protection. Ons applied to the valetudinarium. Priests did not bless the space. Gods were not invoked. The cult of Asclepius operated temples of healing elsewhere, structured around dreams, incubation, and ritual baths. But the valetudinarium was not sacred, it was functional. The only divine figure permitted in its halls was Mars, the god of war. A painted relief of his helmeted visage watched from above the main entry, chipped and streaked with smoke. The bed linens were never changed. Straw was burned when lice became intolerable. Water was drawn from cisterns, often shared with latrines. Flies hovered over open wounds. Rats moved beneath the pallets. Antiseptic existed only in theory. The concept of contagion, though observed, had no scientific model. Doctors noted patterns but could not trace cause. Infection was a fate, not a failure. Some gladiators developed resilience. Wounds that would kill others healed in them. These were rare men, young, genetically fortunate, or simply unbroken. Their recoveries were studied, their regimens were copied, but even these men succumbed to accumulation. Every injury left residue. Scar tissue hardened muscle. Breathing became labored, sight blurred, reflexes dulled. The arena made no allowance for fatigue. A slow hand meant a fast death. When a fighter healed, he was returned to training immediately. No ceremony, no confirmation. The chalk mark above his name on the roster was erased. He was expected at drills the next morning. Limping was tolerated. Hesitation was not. The arena was never designed for fairness. It was engineered for control. Every match, no matter how brutal, was staged within a framework calibrated to emphasize power, not justice. The notion of two equals entering combat to test their skill was an illusion constructed for the crowd. Behind the scenes, odds were manipulated, pairings prearranged, and outcomes, where possible, nudged into place. The arena was not a battlefield. It was a theatre with fatal stakes. The most obvious form of manipulation was in match assignment. Gladiators were categorized by fighting style: murmillo, retiarius, secutor, thraex. But these classifications did not ensure balanced opposition. Combatants were often deliberately mismatched to favor spectacle. A lightly armored retiarius, wielding only a trident and net, might be placed against a heavily shielded secutor, whose helmet allowed minimal visibility but maximum coverage. This was not meant to be a test of equals. It was a test of narrative, movement versus mass, agility versus encasement. Height, reach, injury history, and even mental state were known to the Lanistae, who worked in consultation with the editor or sponsor of the games to propose matchups. A fighter returning from the valetudinarium might be pitted against a well-rested opponent. Another might be told the match was to first blood, only to discover, mid-combat, that no such limit had been declared to the crowd. In the stands, the blood looked the same, but the violence was uneven by design. Fighters with poor performance records were often placed into matches with rising stars. This had less to do with entertainment value and more with narrative economy. A well-regarded gladiator needed wins to boost his marketability. The easiest way to secure one was through a lopsided fight staged under the pretense of randomness. The loser, already diminished in value, became a tool for or another's ascension. His death was not meaningful, it was strategic. On some occasions, even the weapons were tampered with. Edges dulled, grips loosened, shield straps frayed. These adjustments were subtle, but lethal over time. A poorly tied greave could expose a shin to rupture. A loose helmet buckle could turn a glancing blow into a fatal strike. The audience rarely noticed. They cheered the death, not the flaw. The fighter's only recourse was endurance. If he survived, the tampering might be attributed to mistake. If he died, the matter was closed. Not all matches were fights. Some were demonstrations, choreographed engagements between experienced fighters, staged to appear violent but practiced in advance. These spectacular allowed favored gladiators to appear without significant risk. Blades were real, but movements were measured. Blood was sometimes drawn deliberately to appease the audience, then staunched in private. The crowd could not distinguish staged pain from real. Their satisfaction came from noise and motion, not outcome. But even these staged combats could turn. A slip, a misread signal, or a sudden decision by the editor could escalate the performance into actual violence. And in Rome, a fight begun could not be paused. Once the audience saw blood, the match acquired a new urgency. The crowd's roar could transform mimicry into murder in seconds. The editor held sovereign control over the final verdict. If a gladiator fell but survived, he raised a finger to plead for mercy, a gesture called missio. The editor could grant it, deny it, or consult the crowd. This moment, often romanticized as democratic justice, was in fact deeply political. The editor's decision reflected his reputation, not his mercy. Sparing too many made him seem weak. Killing too many drained the talent pool and drew ire from the Lannistae. The crowd's shouts were not votes. They were barometers of public mood, leveraged for political theatre. Even emperors, who presided over the largest games, used the arena as an extension of their will. Commodus ordered mass executions mid-match. Claudius reversed crowd decisions for spectacle. Nero reportedly arranged for contests to punish personal enemies, disguising vendetta as sport. In these cases, the notion of fairness evaporated entirely. The gladiator's fate lay not in his training or his valor, but in the unseen tension between spectacle and state. Beneath the arena floor, the fighters prepared in silence. There were no warm-up rituals, no strategic planning. Most had no idea whom they would face until moments before the lift rose. Instructions were shouted, and the platform ascended. The light changed from subterranean gloom to blinding sun. The roar of the crowd, sudden and absolute, filled the lungs before the first breath could be taken. The match had begun before the fighter could comprehend the shape of the sand. Once inside, the psychological war commenced. A fighter's previous injuries could be exploited if known. A limp, a weak shoulder, a favoured side, all were signals to be read in the opening seconds. In matches between strangers, the body became both weapon and narrative. Hesitation was fatal. Precision was rare. Most engagements devolved into slashing chaos, with footwork lost to pace, nick and rhythm swallowed by dust. There were no referees, there were no pauses, there was no appeal. If a weapon was dropped, it might be returned by a servant, or it might not. If a fighter stumbled, he was kicked until upright or still. If he attempted to flee, he was hunted. Retreat was not dishonourable, it was ineffective. The crowd wanted pursuit. The only safety was in engagement. Blood was not just expected, it was scheduled. Matches that ended too quickly drew scorn. A kill in the opening minutes could provoke silence rather than cheers. To appease the audience, fighters sometimes delayed the finishing blow. They drew out the encounter, exchanged non-lethal strikes, and waited for cues. Gestures from the sponsor's box, horn calls from the musicians, or signals from the doctores, watching from the sideline. Sometimes the blood was not from combat. Fighters injured in training or recovering from illness were still forced to fight. Their wounds reopened, their stamina failed, their deaths were labelled as weak performances rather than institutional failures. No ledger noted the infection that preceded the fall. No inscription recorded the fever in the blood. The crowd saw only collapse, and collapse meant submission. In rare instances, a gladiator might be spared after a loss. This decision, while celebrated in myth, came with cost. The fighter's next match would be made harder. A man spared twice in a row was seen as exploiting public generosity. A third request for missio often meant automatic denial. The gesture, once symbolic of mercy, became a calculation, and the fighter was its variable. Even in victory, fairness was not guaranteed. A gladiator who performed too well risked becoming a threat to other fighters, to the editor, to the crowd's fickle attention span. Undefeated fighters were sometimes sent into impossible matches, paired with multiple opponents or exotic animals without armor. Others were suddenly reassigned to distant provinces under the pretense of promotion, only to vanish en route. Graffiti from Pompeii illustrates this subtle manipulation. One wall reads, "Crescens retiarius visit omnis, sed non radiit." Crescens, the net fighter, defeated all but did not return. Another records, "Felix Murmillus damnatus est quia risit." Felix the Murmillo was condemned because he laughed. These inscriptions reflect not arrogance but ambiguity. Success did not breed safety, it bred attention, and attention was dangerous currency. The executions were not peripheral, they were not sideshows, they were central to the day's program, deliberately placed in the middle of the schedule between competitive bouts and exotic animal displays. The Roman crowd did not stumble upon death, it paid for it, and it came early, often, and without ambiguity. The official term was noxii, designating those condemned to die in the arena. These were not gladiators, though they were often mistaken for them by those seated too high to see the difference. Noxi included prisoners of war, slaves accused of revolt, debtors, political dissidents, and criminals condemned under capital offences, real and fabricated. Some were sentenced without trial, others as part of a performance decree, their lives traded for the spectacle value they could provide. Their role was not to fight, it was to die visibly. There was a schedule. On major festival days, execution segments were announced ahead of time on stone or wooden placards known as edicta. These programs listed the day's order: venationes in the morning, executions at midday, and gladiatorial contests in the afternoon. The midday executions were timed precisely, occurring under the full exposure of the sun, when shadows were short and blood ran quickest across hot sand. Some executions were straightforward. The condemned were marched into the arena, unarmed, stripped, sometimes gagged. Wild animals were released, lions, leopards, bears. They were not starved as often imagined. They were underfed just enough to guarantee aggression. Deaths were rarely clean. Bites tore through ribs, necks, groins. Victims did not die immediately. Many were mauled and left conscious until blood loss or shock set in. The crowd cheered or jeered depending on how long the condemned writhed. Other executions were theatrical. These were known as damnatio ad bestias or damnatio ad ludum, but also mythological executions. In these, the condemned were costumed to portray figures from Roman mythology. Their deaths reenacted the stories known to every citizen. A man tied to a stake, limbs stretched, was said to be Marsyas, flayed alive by Apollo. Another was bound to a wheel representing Ixion, his bones broken with iron rods. A woman dressed in animal skins was cast into the arena as Dirce to be trampled by a bull. The names didn't matter. The crowd knew the scripts. The blood was real. Executions were designed to erase individuality. Victims were not named aloud. Their personal histories were not shared. They became characters, not persons, forms to fill a narrative of divine punishment or imperial justice. The architecture of the Colosseum reinforced this. Trapdoors allowed sudden appearances. Scenery could be raised by pulley and lever. The condemned were inserted into a machine of illusion, where suffering was framed as symmetry. Occasionally condemned men were told they had a chance for freedom. They would be armed, minimally, and set against trained gladiators. These fights, called sine missione, were without mercy. The term chance at freedom was rhetorical. The outcome had been decided the moment the match was booked. The weapons issued were often defective, spears that splintered on contact, shields with warped leather grips, no armor, no helmet. The crowd knew the difference. It made the kill sweeter. Some noxii were used to simulate naval battles, drowned in artificial lakes created by flooding the Colosseum's hypogeum. Others were affixed to crosses and set ablaze, especially during the reigns of emperors seeking moral cleansing through visible punishment. Christians were among the most commonly executed groups under this model. For them, the process was public erasure, not just death, but negation of name, ideology, and memory. Graffiti in the outer corridors of the Colosseum includes a scratched record: Venatio, Damnatio, Arena Plena Sanguinis, Beast Hunt, Execution, Arena full of blood. Another fragment from the Ludus Dacicus, a training school in Rome, reads: Melius est esse gladiator quam noxius. Better to be a gladiator than a condemned. The distinction was understood by all who trained, all who watched, all who wagered. One had a chance, the other had a script. The stagecraft extended beyond death. The bodies of the executed were removed not with ceremony but with efficiency. Hooks were inserted beneath the ribs or through the mouth. The corpses were dragged through sand to one of several concealed gates at the base of the arena wall. They were never seen again. Cremation was standard, burial rare. Bones of the noxii, when excavated centuries later, were found outside city limits, mixed with refuse, animal remains, and discarded amphorae. Even in decomposition, they were unrecognized. The use of execution for amusement is referenced by Roman historians, Suetonius, Martial, Cassius Dio, but not always with criticism. Martial, in his Liber Spectacularum, describes an execution play involving Prometheus, with real fire and vultures trained to peck at flesh. The tone is not mournful, it is descriptive. The detail lies in the technical achievement, not the human cost. Within the imperial household, the executions served a dual function: public distraction and elite demonstration. By staging death, the emperor reminded the citizen body of order, authority, and consequence. The blood that soaked the arena floor was less about retribution than spectacle. The crowd did not ask why the condemned had been chosen. They asked only if the kill was clean. Behind the seating tiers, vendors sold refreshments. Children played with miniature swords. Musicians tuned instruments between segments. The machinery of death did not disturb the festive atmosphere. It was part of it. The sun does not set for the gladiator. Not in the way it does for citizens of the empire who drink wine by lamplight and retreat behind tiled walls. For the man in the cell, nightfall is not an end, but a suspension. Another interval of waiting. The stone absorbs the last of the day's warmth quickly. By the time the guards pass with their torches, the walls of the cell have gone cold. Cold enough that bare skin contracts involuntarily, reopening scabs from the day's exertions. Ribs shift with shallow breath, tendons strain beneath drying wounds. There is no bandaging unless one has won. Even then, it is minimal. The body's recovery is secondary to its availability. The gladiator is fed after the games. This too is part of the routine. Flatbread, pottage, sometimes boiled beans, enough to replenish strength, never enough to comfort. The meals are distributed by functionaries who do not speak to the fighters. Names are not used. The bowls are passed through grates. In rare instances, a name might be whispered by a fellow fighter. Usually it is a nickname, something etched in jest or irony: one eye, goat legs, venator for a man who once trained animals. These names exist only in the confines of the ludus. They do not reach the arena. The crowd chants titles, not identities. Thraex, Mamillo, Bestiarius. Pain is categorized by silence. There are no moans, no complaints. To voice suffering is to mark oneself. Tomorrow's pairing might include the man who overheard it. Among the graffiti scratched into the walls of surviving gladiator barracks, a phrase repeats across regions: "Non dormis usque in lux." You will not sleep until light. It was not metaphor. The ache of bruised bone and the coil of anticipation made rest elusive. Some sat upright through the dark, back against the stone, arms crossed to preserve body heat. Others scratched into the floor with fin, gurnails carving invisible lines. The ludus is never quiet. Even after dusk, the place vibrates with muffled noise. Chains, coughing, footsteps overhead. The building's anatomy includes the training yard, the barracks, the hospital, and the cellars. Movement echoes indiscriminately. A man 3 doors down, vomiting blood from internal damage, is indistinguishable from a rat dragging bone. The gladiator learns not to listen. Outside the gates, the city stirs differently. Rome celebrates the games with processions, recitations, and public feasts. The victor, if celebrated, might be awarded garlands or silver coins. But the recipient rarely sees them. They are distributed among managers, lanistae, and political patrons. A slave gladiator has no direct claim. The honor is symbolic. Some schools grant limited privileges to proven fighters: extra water, a blanket, fewer chores. These favors are earned, not guaranteed, and they are temporary. A fighter who survives 5 matches might be granted reprieve from common tasks. A 6th loss erases it. There is no cumulative worth. For those with upward potential, rare volunteers, citizens who sold themselves into combat for fame, there is a different track. Their quarters are marginally better, their path more public. They are paraded before matches, interviewed by scribes, but their risk is not reduced. Rome praises ambition, but sanctifies blood. When sleep does come, it arrives suddenly. The body collapses into exhaustion rather than rest. Dreams are brief and indistinct: sand, fire, silence. No visions of family, no remembered fields. The ludus edits memory down to essential cues: the angle of a blade, the timing of a sidestep, the tone of a trumpet. Inscriptions recovered from the necropolis at Ostia record fragments of gladiator epitaphs. Most are generic: he fought bravely, he pleased the people, but some suggest lingering though. Uct. One reads, "He returned once, then never again." Another, "He saluted with his eyes closed." The phrase most associated with gladiators, "Ave imperator morituri te salutant," was not universal. It is recorded in Suetonius during a naval mock battle on Lake Fucinus, not at the Colosseum. Most gladiators never uttered it, but it endures in legend because it captured Rome's ritual, the pageantry of submission. Salutation was not spontaneous, it was choreographed. Fighters were trained to raise their arms in acknowledgement, to nod or bow depending on status. The gesture did not express loyalty, it acknowledged proximity to death. The emperor, if present, rarely acknowledged individual fighters. His gaze swept the arena, not the men. His gestures determined fate, thumb up, thumb down, or sideways. Historians debate the meanings. Some say the thumb up signaled death, like a sword raised. Others argue the reverse. But to the fighter, the gesture's clarity mattered less than the outcome. At night, those who lived through the day's match replayed the emperor's decision in their minds, not just his hand, but his posture, the angle of his head, the speed of the decree. Was it hesitation? Was there a pause? Did he confer with the editor or act alone? For many, the answer became moot. Once the sun fell, the day was archived. Victory, injury, humiliation, all dissolved into the same silence. The following morning, a new list was posted. New names, new matches. A fighter who had killed yesterday might be matched again. There was no grace period. And for those not listed, uncertainty lingered. Some were rotated out for recovery, others for punishment. And some simply disappeared, transferred, sold, or dead from wounds not publicly disclosed. The final salute is not the act of raising the arm. It is the quiet before the gate opens. It is the moment in which every muscle recognizes its purpose. Not survival, not glory, but readiness. The gate is made of iron. It rusts at the hinges, and it opens without sound. The gate closes again. Behind it, a man, not free, not citizen, not criminal, only a tool honed for a single purpose, a gladiator. The day resets, bones settle, wounds clot, breath slows. The machine of the arena pauses, but it does not stop. In Rome, marble steps cool beneath sandals. Amphorae are drained. Laughter spills from taverns. Stories are told of great battles, of beasts slain, of men made legend. But the men themselves are not remembered, only the blood. The crowd disperses, the sand is raked clean, and the next morning waits, identical to the last. Glory was never the reward. Endurance was.